Hi, I am Mordechai Becher. Welcome to Jewish Broadcasting Service, Dimensions of the Daf, in which we explore ideas from the Talmud, Jewish law, Jewish ethics, Jewish morality, based on the famous and massive 20-volume or so Talmud. And we try to have each program as a quantum unit of Talmud. You don't have to have seen previous, you don't have to see the next one, although I think it's a good idea. This week we'll be reading the section in Numbers, Bamidbar, which talks about Moses sending 12 spies. Jews are in the desert, they've come out of Egypt, they're in the Sinai desert, we want to enter Israel. Moses sends 12 spies to Israel. Amongst them, the two most famous, Joshua and Caleb. And they go into Israel and they come back with some negative reports, and there's a whole messy story there, which is interesting, but that's not what I'm so much concerned with. So it prompted me to think about being a kosher spy. We know that Israel, as you'll see on the screen, has a very famous spy service known as the Mossad. And the Mossad had a number of very famous operations. One of them was, of course, the location and capture of Adolf Eichmann, the infamous Nazi war criminal who was living as Ricardo Clemens in Argentina. And Israel sent a group of Mossad agents to Argentina, kidnapped him, brought him back to Israel, and he was put on trial for his part in the murder of 6 million Jews, and he was hanged in Israel. So that was a very famous Mossad operation. The Mossad also identified the danger of the Iraqi nuclear reactor under Saddam Hussein, and well before the Iraq war, Israel sent a squadron of planes which bombed it and destroyed it before it could become operational. More recently, the Mossad is, after the Munich Olympics, when Palestinian terrorists massacred the Israeli athletes in the Israeli team, and the rescue was botched completely by the Germans. So Israel sent Mossad operatives to Europe, where they assassinated all the members of that terrorist group who was directly involved in the Munich Olympics and the planning of it. And they've had some successes, mostly successes, and mostly behind the scenes, and most stuff we do not know about. The most famous spy they had was, of course, Ellie Cohen, who was a Jew, Sephardi Jew from the Middle East, who had lived in Israel, who went to Argentina and posed as an Iraqi a Syrian national. In Argentina, there's a large expat Syrian community there. Eventually, he moved to Syria, where he actually became very friendly with many, many people in the government there and members of the general staff of the Syrian army. There were even some who wanted him to run for office in Syria for the party, become deputy prime minister or something. Unbelievable stuff. And he, of course, gave a lot of valuable information to Israel, which helped tremendously during the Six-Day War. Ellie Cohen eventually was found by the Syrian Secret Service and hanged publicly in Damascus. So that's the Mossad. Now, the Mossad, as you'll see, this is the motto, and the symbol of the Mossad is on the first screen. It's actually, their motto is a verse in Proverbs, which says, "Be'ein tachbulot yipol am," when there is no strategy, people fall. But in the multitude of counsel, Chua barav yoetz, there is salvation. So strategy and counsel meaning intelligence. Interestingly, you'll see a report from the Times of Israel that from 2014, as you probably know, in the Israeli army there are many, many Orthodox Jews. Probably about 30%, I think, of officers, I think now are observant Jews, Orthodox Jews in the Israeli army. There's a lot of them in the Israeli army. And as you might expect, since Orthodox Jews form a large percentage of the Israeli population, some of them have found their way into various roles, and in the case of the Mossad, as spies. So the Mossad, according to this report in Ma'ariv, appointed a rabbi. The rabbi is not known. He's known as Rabbi Sheehan. just by the first letter of his name. He must be a rabbi with high security clearance. And in Israel, we do have many rabbis who served in the Israeli army in combat units. And the present chief rabbi of Israel, Rabbi David Lau, is actually a colonel in Israeli army intelligence reserves. And you have many, many rabbis in the Israeli army. And so a rabbi you need two things here. You need someone who is a very major scholar who's going to answer questions of weight, but he also have to have security clearance. You're not going to go, if you're a spy, you're not going to go to the rabbi of your local synagogue, and ask him the questions. He doesn't have security clearance. So it's interesting, they appointed a rabbi to give legal rulings for kosher spies, spies who are religious Jews, observant Jews. Now, what type of question? So the first point I want to discuss is spies in general. So there is some criticism, apparently, of Moses for sending these spies, and criticism of the spies who came back with a terrible, negative, pessimistic report about Israel, telling the Jews that there's no way we can succeed in going into Israel. The land's going to destroy us. The people are going to destroy us. It's hopeless, hopeless, hopeless. And there's a lot of criticism of this, and the Jews despair. But Nachmanides, one of the great commentators on the Torah from Spain, 13th century, he was about 10 years old when Maimonides died. So he overlapped about 10 years, and he became one of the great sages of Spain, eventually moved to Israel and established a synagogue in Jerusalem. So Nachmanides writes the following. First of all, he points out, the actual sending of spies, not a problem. The resolution of the matter is thus: Israel spoke in the manner of all who enter to wage war in a foreign land. Usually send men before them to study the ways and the entrances to the cities. It is totally acceptable and normal to send recon ahead of time. In other words, the Torah, he says, is not against doing that. He says you send reconnaissance spies into to see what the lay of the land is in the cities. When they return, the seekers go at the front of the army to show them the way. Obviously, these people who did recon will lead the army in battle because they know exactly the lay of the land and the people and the fortifications and everything else. This is totally logical. As it says, show us, please, the entrance to the city. And they advise them which city to fight first and from what side it's easier to conquer the land. In other words, the role of a spy is to give strategic advice, geographical advice, military advice, and to see what the reality is. Thus they've explicitly said, they shall return to us word, the way through which we shall ascend, and the cities we shall enter first, from where we shall enter the entire land. This is proper counsel for all conquerors of the land. The Torah is not against having a spy force. It's not against having a espionage and reconnaissance. This is totally normal, a normal thing to do for anyone who's conquering a land. Furthermore, Moses did so himself. As it stated, Moses went to spy out Ya'azer. He sent people to spy out the city of Ya'azer. And similarly, Joshua sent spies, 2 men as spies to, you probably know where, correct, Jericho. He sent spies to Jericho, and they were to see what the morale of the people was, to see how secure they were. So, we find, and Moses, we find other cases, King David sent some people to test the defenses of the Philistines. He said, make some noise if the Philistines come out of their fortress and say, who's out here? Who's out there? He says, that's a bad sign, because that means they're confident. If they stay behind their fortified walls and don't leave, and they scream from the walls, who's there? Halt! Right? Who goes there? That's a good sign. That means they're scared of us. They're not coming out of their fortifications. So we see, Nachmanides is just pointing out that having spies, sending spies, having espionage, reconnaissance is totally okay and normal and acceptable according to Judaism. He says the following: therefore Moses approved, because Scripture, the Torah, does not rely in any of its deeds upon a miracle. We are not allowed to rely upon miracles. In other words, even though the Jews are back in that day, 3,200 years ago, Jews had seen miracles, the 10 plagues, the crossing of the Red Sea, that experienced miracles, but they were not allowed to rely on miracles. They had to take normal precautions that anyone would take when it comes to war, i.e. send intelligence, reconnaissance, spies. strategy. But the Torah does not rely upon a miracle. This, of course, there's a famous question which people ask. Noah builds an ark to put the animals in. So Nachmanides, this same commentator, way back then, he says, look, there's no way that all species on this planet could fit in this ark. I don't care how big the ark is. You could not even fit 1% of 1% of 1% of all species on this planet into the ark. It's just not going to happen. He says the only way you can fit them is miraculously. So he says, well, if it's miraculous, why build an ark at all? Don't do it. I mean, anyway, it's a miracle. So he says the Torah always wants to minimize the miracle. And always, the Torah, God wants to bless what we do, but we've got to do something. You can't just sit there and rely on the miracle. Same is true in military strategy, as we see even with the Jews. In biblical times, when we had prophecy, when we had Moses with us, when we had experienced miracles, etc., he says we do not rely upon a miracle and will command the warriors to arm and guard and conceal themselves. You don't just go in there with large targets on you like the British did in the American War of Independence, the red with the white cross so everyone can aim at them. No, that's crazy, right? Arm, have weapons, guard, right, and conceal themselves, as Scripture appears in the war of Ai, which took place according to Hashem's word and in many places. Nachmanides first and foremost points out, having a Mossad, spies, intelligence, espionage, was something which was there even in biblical times. Moses did it twice, and it was not criticized for that. Joshua did it, was not criticized. Joshua did it twice, was not criticized. David did it, was not criticized. Why? Because we do not rely on miracles. We are supposed to engage in regular military strategy, and that is something which is absolutely acceptable. And I'll furthermore point out, if you have a look at the next slide, in a letter that Maimonides writes to the sages of Montpellier, and this is something I quoted in another class regarding alternative therapies, but this is a different part of that same letter. Maimonides writes the following: there is a great sickness that people have. You know what that is? If you find it written in a book, you think it's true. And all the more so if the books are old. You know what I mean? If I show you an old book and say, look what it says here, wow, right? It's not. So he says, now, there are a lot of people who engaged in books of astrology and discussions. The rash fellow's mind at one leaps to the conclusion that these are words of wisdom. And he says to himself, has the pen of the scribes written in vain? He says this, a very interesting point. He says, this is why our kingdom was lost and our temple was destroyed, and why we were brought to this, meaning to exile. For our fathers sinned and are no more. What did our fathers do wrong? They found books dealing with these themes of the stargazers, the astrologers, these things being the root of idolatry, as we've made clear in the laws of idolatry. They erred, they made mistakes, and were drawn after them, imagining them to be glorious science and to be of great utility, great help. They did not busy themselves with the art of war or the conquest of lands, but imagined that these studies would help them. Therefore, the prophets called them fools and dolts, and truly fools they were. Maimonides tells us a fascinating thing here. He says one of the reasons that our temple was destroyed, that we did not succeed in our battles against the Babylonians in the first temple and the Romans in the second temple, he says because too many people relied on superstition and astrology instead of training for war and instead of doing what is actually necessary for war, which is very interesting to note. What that means is that he's endorsing taking precautions and doing what is necessary in times of war. One of the things necessary is to have a good intelligence service, espionage, reconnaissance, and information. And as the Mossad motto goes, based on the verse in Proverbs, that without strategy, without information, all is lost. And the abundance of information and counsel means salvation and victory. So that is a very important idea. So what are specific halachic issues? So there are many. The first that might come to mind is living as a, let's say you're an undercover agent, what they call human intelligence. You have a person living, as Ellie Cohen did, who lived in Damascus as a Muslim and as a Syrian for years. So what's the situation there? I mean, obviously, if you're living as undercover as a spy, you're not going to be walking around in a yarmulke and tzitzis. This is not a great disguise for an Israeli spy. Obviously, you're not going to be frequenting kosher restaurants or synagogues. You are going to be transgressing many laws of the Torah. You may have to transgress Shabbat. You'd be eating on Yom Kippur, and so on and so forth. Well, here, the answer given by Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, who was actually asked by a student of his. Rav Aaron Lichtenstein was head of a yeshiva in Israel known as Har Etzion Yeshiva. He was a son-in-law of Rabbi Yosef Ber Soloveitchik, very famous, and one of the last century's most famous Talmudic scholars. But in addition, he was the head of a yeshiva, Talmudic academy in Israel, which was also what's called a Hesder yeshiva, meaning where the students both studied Torah and also served in the Israeli army, many of them in elite units. One of the students was asked to recruited from army intelligence to work in the Mossad. And in the course of the interview process, one of the things he was asked was, would he be prepared to live undercover for an extended amount of time in another country? And he went and asked his teacher, Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, can I do this? Would this be allowed? Rav Aaron Lichtenstein responded, yes, it would be allowed. He says, just like war is the wars of the state of Israel are all pikuach nefesh, meaning saving of life. We are surrounded by hostile enemies whose stated policy explicitly is to destroy utterly the state of Israel and to kill everyone they can, God forbid. So we are engaged, since the beginning of the state of Israel, we've been engaged in a war for survival. We've been attacked many, many times, both overtly and covertly, and hence the Mossad is engaged in war. In war, and to save life, one is allowed, it's self-defense, you can kill someone. If your life is in danger, you can eat on Yom Kippur. If the Day of Atonement, if your life is in danger, you transgress Shabbat. So Rav Aaron Soloveitchik responded that there is no question in his mind that if this would be deemed necessary by experts for the security of the state of Israel, it is an act of defensive war, it's an act of saving of lives of our people, and he says these activities would be permissible. You would be allowed to live as a non-Jew, disguised as a Muslim, as a Christian, as a Hindu, as a Buddhist, whatever it happens to be. You could live as if, right? Why? This is part of the war effort. He didn't actually discuss Hinduism, Buddhism, or Christianity, but he discussed just like not living as a Jew, transgressing various things that we take for granted, like kosher laws and Shabbat and the festivals and so on and so forth. There is as it happened, this particular student did not go into the Mossad for other reasons, but again, that was the question that was asked. Another question, this also was posed, according to Hanoch Teller, in one of his books, and I can't really confirm these type of things. You can't really confirm details, but he maintains that someone who asked this same question to Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, who was a very brilliant and great rabbi, also of last century, who lived in Jerusalem. He asked him a similar question. Reb Shlomo Zalman said, although this is permitted, he would not recommend it for long term. And he said an interesting idea. He says, why? Because living in danger like that means you've got to be prepared to kill at the drop of a hat. He says, so yes, you're in danger, but you also have to be someone who is able, if they need to kill. And while it's true of any soldier, but in combat is one thing. But being able to kill, so to speak, when it's not in combat, in a civilian situation, he felt was not ideal to cultivate that type of character trait, and he was, in some sense, felt that it was not ideal. Again, unconfirmed. So that would be one issue. I guess another issue would be, let's say this Mossad agent is living undercover in a foreign country for a year. He now gets the opportunity to get out, and this is what Ellie Cohen actually did. He left Syria occasionally, visited Argentina, and then secretly went to Israel from there via some circuitous route, so he would not be discovered that he was going to Israel. So what should he do? Should he, let's say, wait until Yom Kippur so he can get out there and observe Yom Kippur? Should he wait till Rosh Hashanah so he can hear the shofar? Should he wait until Purim so he can hear Megillah? In other words, what's the first thing he should do when he gets out? He hasn't been keeping the Sabbath. He hasn't been eating kosher. He hasn't been putting on tefillin. He hasn't been praying. He hasn't been doing all the things that a Jew should do. So should he time his furlough from that duty to do something specific, or just first thing that comes to? So this question was actually asked to Reb David ben Zimra, who's a rabbi in Egypt in the 16th century, a Jew who was imprisoned in 16th century Egypt. And he was given 1 day. The authorities said, we'll give you a 1 day furlough. You can go out of prison for a day, and then you have to come back. So he asked the question, what should he do? Should he just take the first opportunity, get out, go to the nearest synagogue, put on tefillin, pray, etc., eat some kosher food, say grace after meals, whatever, first opportunity of a mitzvah? Or should he wait until a specific time where there's like a big deal, like a mitzvah like hearing the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, or fasting on Yom Kippur, or hearing the scroll of Esther read on Purim? The Radvaz, very famously, Reb David ben Zimra, famously quoted to a Gemara, which I've got here, which is Reb Shimon ben Lakish says, don't pass over a mitzvah. Or as it's phrased in a different source, a mitzvah that comes to your hand, don't let it become leaven. No, don't leave it. So he says, you know what, the rule is, first opportunity you get, you should go and do the first mitzvah that you're able to do. Because he says two reasons. A, you have no idea if they'll actually, if you'll get the opportunity later. If you delay it till Yom Kippur, maybe it won't happen at all. So seize the moment right now, number one. And he says, number two, we have a general rule. If there's a mitzvah which is available to you now, and there's another mitzvah which is available later, you should do the mitzvah which is available now and don't push it aside for something later. That is a famous rule. One of the things that was discussed and is mentioned in the article in Ma'ariv, which you'll see in that first slide, is that there was a rabbi that ruled that if a Mossad agent would need to do what they call a honey trap, which I don't even know if they actually do these things anymore, where one would sleep with a foreign person in order to get information, a woman or a man. Anyone who's read a spy novel or seen a spy movie will be familiar with this idea. Is that permitted? And one of the precedents that is actually cited for being allowed to do this is, can anyone think of a precedent of someone sleeping with the enemy in order to save the Jewish people? Anyone? No. Well, the answer is Queen Esther. Queen Esther saved the Jewish people when she intervened in the plans of Haman to destroy and kill the Jews in the Persian Empire. How did she do this? She actually became the wife, one of the wives of the king Ahasuerus. So here she slept with the enemy in order to save the Jewish people. And there are sources in the Talmud and actually in the Poskim, in later rulings, notably Yehuda Yechezkel Landau of Prague, and others who discuss this, and they say even though one cannot commit an act of sexual immorality to save oneself, but if it's for the whole Jewish people, Hatzalat Kol Klal Yisrael Shani, saving the whole Jewish people, is a little different, and that would actually be allowed in such a case. Again, these are all theoretical, and we don't know the questions that are asked by Orthodox Mossad agents to this rabbi, because we don't even know who the rabbi is, and clearly he's not going to publish the stuff because this is all security clearance required. But again, these are some examples of some moral and halachic legal issues that may come up, and actually do come up, as we know that these situations arise, and we know these questions have been asked from reports in the Israeli press and from someone actually I know who does. Okay, well, I'm not going to go any further because this is on public television. But anyway, we do know that these things happen, and again, these are some of the issues that may arise with being a kosher spy. So we discussed having an espionage and spy group in the first place, which we see from Moses, Joshua, King David is certainly allowed and does not contravene Jewish law. On the contrary, Jewish law says don't rely on a miracle, involve yourself in strategy, reconnaissance, spying, military training, weapons, and so on and so forth. Perfectly acceptable, not only acceptable, but it's a mitzvah. Secondly, we also saw that this was actually one of the causes of destruction of the temple, that people relied on superstition, astrology, etc., instead of training and getting ready for war, as Maimonides points out. We also discussed whether living undercover and not observing Jewish law would be allowed, and we said, of course, yes, it would be allowed, just like because we're engaged in a defensive war to save lives, save our lives, and this would be allowed. The spy is no less a soldier than someone on the front lines, and so he would be allowed, she would be allowed to live in this way. We mentioned how if they get a chance to leave for a temporarily a furlough, etc., go back to Israel, go back to the country of origin, etc., what should they do? Should they save it for Rosh Hashanah, Pesach, the Seder? No, they should seize the first opportunity in order to perform the first mitzvah they can when they're in a situation where they can do mitzvot, commandments. And thirdly, even in an extreme situation of sleeping with the enemy, what they call honey trap in spy novels that I've read, John le Carré and that type of stuff, etc. So that would appear to be okay if it's a situation where it's for the saving of the Jewish people, as Esther did in the Scroll of Esther. So that's a little bit of an introduction to the Being a Kosher Spy. If anyone's interested in joining the Mossad, do not contact me. I'm sure they have a website or a Facebook page or something. But anyway, those are some of the issues. Hope you'll tune in next time. This is Mordechai Becher with Jewish Broadcasting Service, Dimensions of the Daf. And if you're interested in seeing me in print and reading my stuff, do people still read books? I have no idea. But my book, Gateway to Judaism, is available at various booksellers. And thanks for watching.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jem, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.